On this Monday evening. With me tonight, we have my co-host, Peter Ray Alston.
Good evening, everyone.
And our special guest for today, Charlie Menzies.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I did pronounce your second name properly, didn't I?
Yes, no, yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah.
I like how we're checking this now, live, and in the show.
I just rolled the dice.
Beforehand.
I just rolled the dice and, went with it, and there you go. Okay, so Charlie, who are you? What do you do? What's your thing? Tell us about yourself.
Hello, so I'm the lead creative over at Parable Games. So we've kind of been releasing pretty much like horror-themed games now for the kind of past couple of years. Our kind of main product that we've made so far is Shiver, which is a play your very own scary movie on the tabletop. So you can play anything from Stranger Things to Scream to Scooby-Doo to Alien. As long as there's something spooky, a bit scary going on with it, you can run it with Shiver. So that's who I am. So I wear quite a few hats. We're quite a small company, so I'm kind of on like lead writer, lead creative. I do a bit of the layout as well as like some business bits, and being boots on the ground at conventions, which is where I met Peter.
You per bastard.
Yeah, I was at the Derbyshire edition of the UK Comic Con and Gaming Festivals, and yeah, like I say, one thing that kind of stood out when I saw you guys at the stand was like your game is very horror agnostic. If you look at like most horror role playing games, like for example, Call of Cthulhu it can only really run investigative horror. If you look at Cult, that's always kind of real kind of cosmic horror. If you look at say Vampire, it's generally personal horror, but you've gone for a very kind of a broad approach from, like say, from Scooby-Doo all the way through to Hellraiser, which is impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's I would say it's definitely came from my love of like horror movies, particularly kind of B movies, and the broad spreads that you can have. I mean, I've always said like horror is a broad church, and I think it's one of the most diverse of kind of genres, whether it's kind of in cinema or kind of in literary works, comics, whatever, games. It's got an extremely broad scope. But for me with Shiver, the thing I really wanted to achieve was being able to kind of replicate what I loved doing, which was having my friends over for a horror movie night, kind of get really absorbed in the kind of who's going to live, who's going to die, kind of wrap it all up relatively quickly, and then kind of do it all again next week. And that's really like the kind of core of Shiver, the essence of it, of what we were going for, in comparison to other kind of I know exactly what you mean, kind of more specific kind of horror TTRPGs.
So what's the difference between your sort of horror RPG than say other ones like oh god, I've put myself on the spot now.
Come on, Matt. Come on, you can do it.
Oh god,
you've played one. You have played.
Oh yeah, Call of Cthulhu. Yeah, Call of the Cthulhu. Yeah. Oh my god, I know. We had him on the podcast recently as well. So yeah.
So I'll put my hands up. I'm a big Call of Cthulhu fan. Absolutely love it. So kind of when we're drawing comparisons, just want people to know I don't dislike Cthulhu. Love it. It's one of my favorite other kind of RPGs to play. Still kind of regularly play it. But I think, as Peter said, it's one of the things kind of where its strength is in that investigative, but also its temporal setting of horror. It's very that 1920s running around the streets of Arkham, trying to find out who the Fishman is. It knows what it's about, and it does that very, very specific setting temporally, as well as the kind of threats that you face very, very well. With Shiver, where we differ is that setting agnostic approach to horror. So we can approach anything kind of that has a horror element, whether it's and also give you tools to modulate that level of horror as well, which is really, really important. Call of Cthulhu, I would say, is relatively difficult to modulate for younger players. Our game, it's why we always use like Scooby-Doo and Stranger Things as kind of like a slightly kind of lower end spooky example, as whilst then we've got like Hellraiser and Scream and Alien kind of more, and that more at the top. I think the thing is that one of the things I wanted to approach with it, where we kind of differ, is that cinematic approach in terms of like our references, but also how that bleeds into the game and all of its mechanics to really try and make you feel like you're playing a movie was very, very important to us. And also giving a common language that people understand. Like people understand age ratings and cinema lingo from just, you know, rocking up to an Odeon and buying a cinema ticket. So when you apply that, so we do that with our adventures. We have the Shiver border classification, for example, that we slap at the beginning of our adventures, which gives you content warnings, it gives you age guidance, but then we also then include things of like, if you want to move, you know, something from a 15 to a 12A, this is what you can do for certain adventures. So a bit of context, my background before moving into game design was in film and TV.
Okay.
So it was kind of, my thought was kind of, how can we bring some of the approaches, story structure, pacing, and also just general love letter to cinema, especially horror cinema, to the tabletop. So I'd say that broadly is what kind of makes us very, very different from something like Call of Cthulhu, which has its very specific focus in what I would say its own corner of horror. We're trying to explore the genre as a whole and also make horror accessible to all the kind of corners of the TTRPG space. Whether you're a young player, a new player, a veteran, we kind of, and as long as you've got a horror idea, we want to make it feel like those players can jump on Shiver and play it and use it to kind of whatever they want to play.
So what's your sort of kind of main mechanic? Is it D20s? What do you use?
So we use a completely new dice system. It's called the Archetype dice system. So it's a dice pool system that uses 2 different symbolic dice. So first up, we have our skill die, which is a 6-sided die, which has a differing symbol on every single face. Each symbol represents one of your core skill areas. So off the top of my head, they are grit, wit, smart, heart, luck, and strange. They pretty much do exactly kind of what you'd expect to this on the tin. Grit is like your analog for strength and fortitude, wit for dexterity of body and mind, smart for puzzle solving, working with complex machinery, big old sci-fi weapons sometimes kind of interact with smarts quite a lot in our game. Hearts is both sides of that charisma coin. If you want to be charming and schmoozing or intimidating and lying, that's where kind of hearts lies. Then luck is just pure chance. So that can be rummaging around in a bag and landing on like the lucky item, rolling a luck check to see, when the killer chops down a tree, does it land on you or does it land on your friend next to you? And then finally, it wouldn't be a horror game without something that was a bit strange. So with strange, that is for using any powers that are kind of beyond the line of like normality. So that could be like changing into a werewolf. It could be, using dark magic, any kind of Cthulian type rituals would be rolling off strange. And it's also what your characters use to resist fear, because the further into the world of the strange you are, the less like you are going to be afraid. But if that's something you're not used to, then your character is more likely to be affected by fear. So that's our skill die. Mm-hmm. And then if you're really good at something, you get a talent die, which has a talent symbol on, which is a little star. And that's a universal success for everything that isn't strange. And strange is represented on the dice separately as well for a very specific reason. So depending on how good you are at something, if you're really good at something, the more dice you roll. And it's as simple as, so say you're a warrior archetype. In our games, we use archetypes so they can kind of fit into any time setting, any place, anywhere. And you want to kick down a door, classic check I use to kind of explain this. I'd say as the director, so our version of a game master, you're going to roll grit. So you have a little top number, which determines how many skill die you roll. And if you're talented in that area, you have a number on your character sheet that just tells you how many talent die you roll. You roll your dice, and it's as simple as you're looking for fists, which represents grit, and you're looking for stars. And that determines how many successes you get. Depending on how sturdy the door is, if it's a rotten wooden flimsy door, you might only need 1 success, only 1 symbol. If it was metal, big padlock, metal bar on the other side, you might need 2, 3, 4 successful symbols in order to succeed. And that's what we call challenge rating. Basically, the harder something is, the more symbols that you need that correlate. And that's And it's as simple as that. So that is how we resolve every challenge in the game. Works exactly the same for combat as well. And the pool is just modulated by different layers of advantage, disadvantage, and then also your abilities that feed in as well.
So you've got like within Call of Cthulhu. So you've got Dungeons and Dragons, which is all about heroes and sort of kind of fighting and doing sort of things. Then you got the complete opposite side, where you've got Call of Cthulhu, which is you're effectively a mortal man who can die very easily. You go crazy if you know too much. Are you sort of kind of in the middle between that? Is that where you're sort of kind of aiming yourself?
Yeah. So I say we kind of fall in the middle, and we have a kind of shifting needle depending on what area of horror you want to kind of explore. Everyone has the same level of HP. Everyone is human. Everyone is squishy, as I like to kind of put it to them. They all have 16 HP. So there isn't as much kind of variance as there is in Cthulhu, where if your character's weaker, your HP can be a kind of one-hit kill scenario from the very start. We kind of put everyone on a bit more of an equal playing field when it comes to that. It's more about your abilities and how that keeps you alive. However, if you want to kind of play something that's a bit more deadly, we have, or you want to play something that's a little bit easier on your players, we've split the game into 2 modes that you can play. So there is survivor mode, which is the kind of most common mode that we play, where the lifeline, we track your 16 HP. Basically, it's just that it tracks down to kind of 0, and then you're at death's door, and you can roll luck saves basically to try and keep yourself alive until someone can get to you. And if you run out of luck, you die. Nightmare mode is different. So nightmare mode is for anyone who's like a big Resident Evil fan. They really, they love that kind of survival horror vibe, or they want that high deadly environment style of like some of the more precarious like Cthulhu adventures. That basically everyone's still got 16 HP, but as you lose quarters on your lifeline, certain effects come into place. So you lose 4 HP, suddenly you're limping. So your character starts to slow down. You can kind of take a nasty knock to the head, and you kind of lose some of your kind of cognitive function. You have to decide what area you're going to dip kind of in your kind of skill array. And it goes on like that. And when you die, you die. There isn't a kind of death saving element with that. You're really trying to keep your characters away from kind of being at death's door, because there's no saving element there. So by splitting it into those 2 modes, we generally start people out on survivor mode, but we're finding a lot of people in our community now who really want to do that like kind of horror movie in one night scenario.
Right. Yeah.
They've played Shiver so much now, and they've gotten used to characters dying. They've kind of gotten over that taboo of character death. They ramp it to nightmare mode, and they just go for it, and they're just chortling along with the popcorn, watching all of their characters get killed off. But if you want a longer form campaign, then survivor mode can be a better fit. So we've kind of again added that modular element of just a slight tweak to how you play to allow for both sides.
Given from the signs of the high rate of character death, how do you kind of keep players involved when the character dies?
Yeah, so we have a rule in there that is kind of up to the director of whether they want to use. But if a character dies, you can turn that player into a ghost. So we use it because we quite often find that when a character dies, I'm sure you found this playing RPGs as well. If a character dies, it's very hard to just instantly integrate a brand new character for them to play. So having them be a ghost for a bit keeps them involved, and usually in a very entertaining way, and kind of lightens the load of like having been killed until you can have a bit of a sidebar or introduce another character for them to play. I mean, we always tend to have suggest having a little stack of like bonus characters that you can introduce at certain points, just in case, to kind of keep people involved. But with the ghost rules, it's great because it depends on what the character's relationship has been like with the rest of the group, what they're going to do. Like if it's somebody who dies unexpectedly and they really want to help their friends, they might nudge something over, like try and give them a clue, try and warn them that something's going to happen like ahead of them. If someone had killed that person within the group, however, they can then poltergeist it and try and push a bookcase on them and try and make and become a bit of a hindrance and make strange and interesting things happen and change the dynamic of the game slightly. Which then also, if someone's playing the weird path where you can talk to the dead, it gets even funnier. Of that is still someone who they can interact with in an interesting way. So yes, so I would say kind of on the other side of that, character creation in Shiver is extremely quick. Kind of, I'd say like once you've got the basic rule set down, which takes about kind of 30 minutes, I'd say, of reading, you can make a character in about 15 minutes. So if somebody does die, they can be a ghost for a bit. And, you know, if you kind of have your, you know, kind of 20-minute break in the middle of your game, someone can quite feasibly have, rather than just be given a pre-gen, they can actually sit down and with director really quickly of being like, I want to play this, quickly kind of make up a character, and then the director can introduce them back into the game. So because that was one of the things, it was like, if death rate's high, character creation needs to be fast as well. But the character creation being fast as well was an element as well of this idea of accessibility as well, of that getting people to the table as fast as possible and not feeling intimidated about character creation, because it was one of the things I found when kind of first embarking on the design process was a lot of my friends were very interested in TTRPGs, but when they heard the word session 0 or spending 3 or 4 hours figuring out the rules and making a character, they kind of were like, yeah, you know, maybe it's not for me, kind of thing. Being like, it's like, oh, come on, we're going to play Jurassic Park. We can make Jeff Goldblum in 15 minutes. They're in. Like they're like, oh yeah, let's do it. That's fine. And I think that's been our ethos, kind of with character creation, definitely.
Were you ever tempted to use the OGL system for the mechanics of the game? Given, like, because you mentioned, like, you know, because it's, you know, it's the most widely known system around, would the accessibility encourage new players? And were you ever tempted to use that?
Oh, you use the 5e?
Yeah.
OGL. No. So the reason I never was is because Shiver was born out of me having a problem with 5e.
Okay, interesting.
So to explain the kind of origin story of Shiver a little bit, I'll rewind a little bit. So I came out of uni and I'd got a job down doing kind of film related stuff in post production in London. I was missing my friends quite a lot, but I'd been writing prose and stuff, and I ended up winning a competition, which gave me a voucher. It was a Penguin Random House like prose competition. Fun if it was a horror story, which allowed me to get all the books. It pretty much burnt the entire voucher. D&D, Jesus, yeah, getting the free books and dice to get started, because I'd played at university. And I'd run like kind of 1 or 2 one-shots, but I'd never owned the books physically because of the price, really. So then I started a group with kind of old university friends, because we were spread all over the country, predominantly screenwriters, and people kind of like working on that side of thing, because that was kind of a big part of our training, kind of where we all met. Was our dissertation was in screenwriting in the end. Put a group together and we started playing 5e, and quite after we played for about, I'd say about like kind of 4 to 6 months, and a lot of issues kind of started to come out. I found with kind of 5e, people were getting confused on the math side, that like in terms of like the rules like being quite overwhelming. We were playing online as well, which I think kind of had some kind of blockades to it. But quite a few of my friends in that group kind of have dyslexia or dyspraxia, or dyscalculia. So I was kind of noticing there were so many for different people with different kind of blockades, they were finding elements of the system really, really tricky to grab onto. And then for me as a GM, I was trying to make things horrifying, but as they leveled up a couple of times, I found it increasingly difficult to maintain a horror atmosphere in 5e for me.
They all turn into superheroes and are
exactly,
unkillable.
Yeah, and that's not a slight at D&D in terms of its system, because ultimately D&D structurally is a hero fantasy. It's a power fantasy, and a power fantasy does not lend itself well to horror. I think it's why a lot of the horror content you actually see for D&D caps out at quite a low level. There's a reason for it. It's because if you feel too powerful, it's the horror
no threat.
Really
There's no threat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You
There's no
know,
threat.
when you're a barbarian, sticking a vampire comes very easy when you can pick up a table and hit them with it.
So it was.
Yeah.
I find that like I've tried to give my group, and we've been playing for nearly 3 years now. We've had a bit of a break because it's been summer holidays and stuff, but we've played for about 3 years now. And I was always trying to instill this sort of like, you know, you guys could die and stuff, but they keep on sort of coming at their level 12s now. There's been a few hair-raising moments where they've come close, but they're all like super powerful and stuff, and it's really hard to sort of get them to a position where, you know, you're being fair, but you've got sort of enough guys in there to give them the threat level that'll sort of make them think seriously without kind of going, let's just set fire to that bridge, or let's punch that shark in the head, or let's do sort of stupid things. And you're just like, come on guys, you know. And then I throw in all these bad guys, and I'm thinking, right, this is going to be a challenge. And then they do something like, yeah, well, so the last episode we did, I threw in like a really powerful. So we had a bit of a sort of like, because you get in D&D groups where stuff happens, and there's a bit of a sort of kind of like people like it or people don't like it and stuff. So I'd thrown in this really sort of like moment where it's like, all right, I don't want them to get past this point. I need them to follow, instead of having this sort of kind of open world, which they've always had. I kind of wanted to sort of not railroad them, but push them in a certain direction so I could get online with this sort of the story. And so I threw in all these really hard bad guys and stuff, and I was like, right, they're going to have no choice but to do what I need them to do. No, they just kind of went on, killed everything, and then that caused its own problems. And then I was like, right, okay, so what I'll do in this one is I'll throw in this sort of secret guy that they don't know about. He'll disappear, and then they'll have no other option but to sort of do the thing. And it's like, so I'm going to put this spell, which is like a stone wall around him, so he can't touch the sphere. And I was like, God damn it! And then so it's like, so they got through that as well. And I was like, oh, so it's so hard because they all have their sort of kind of like their powers, and as soon as the more they get leveled, and I can't track everything because they've all got millions of things that they do, and they always come up with just like, I've got a really good plan for this, and then they go, yeah, so I've got this spell, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I'm like, oh no, I forgot about that. Okay.
I nicknamed it the magical kibosh. I just, yeah, I had a similar thing of forgetting one spell. And then it's like, even if you kind of twist something around that's kind of like tries to blockade that spell in some way, then some players can be like, well, no, but that's not how it works. It's like, for the good of the story, please. Just let's.
Yeah, I spent a long time, and I've said this numerous times. I started off when we first started doing the campaign. I would spend hours, days writing out like journals and writing out sort of kind of doing maps and sort of sorting things out and being like really sort of kind of thorough. But every time they come, like, I just wouldn't get to any of the stuff that I'd spent days and hours on because they would go off in a different direction, or they'd do something that would bypass that. You know, now and again I might be able to get back to one of them if they did something, but I just got to the point where I was like, right, I'm just going to have to be a reactionary DM because there's no other way around it. I have to basically just react to what they do. Because I've given them an open world and said you can pretty much do whatever you want, you know, just do it. And then so I was doing this reactionary stuff, and then yeah, that causes its own. It's because they write their own. The good thing about it is they write their own story. They're effectively, I have a beginning, a middle, and an end with certain points that I do get to have, but within those points, they write their whole story and stuff. Like we had effectively a whole year's worth of campaign that came about because of a side quest that two of them did on some in a Discord chat within downtime, and it sort of kind of spilled off into this sort of kind of full year thing. But yeah, it's not a simple thing, and they are like super overpowered. And it's easy to kill stuff, and you know it's very hard for a DM to give them that sort of kind of that critical, that sort of threat level that makes them think, oh crap, we could actually die here and stuff. And it's, yeah. So I feel you, man. I feel you.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to put where I was. I
sidetracked you. Apologies.
No. It's
I think you were talking about. I think you were talking about sort of a more of a simplistic style. Yeah.
So they were struggling basically. So that's where I was. So they were struggling, and we were running into those issues a lot of the time because they'd leveled up to a certain point. And I think I was noticing this as early as like, getting beyond like level 2 or 3, we were starting to run in kind of to those issues. And I will say this, another thing, managing magic and people managing spells, that was one of the biggest things that I think they struggled with. But the thing is that I think I realized from my side of the table, I was trying to generate cinematic moments, particular horror moments, and it just wasn't working. So I kind of decided just to, like, in my downtime, just to scribbling in a notebook, kind of a way to like bring the mechanics down, do something a bit simpler, and then just basically let us play kind of horror movies or kind of like just movies on the tabletop. And it kind of geared towards horror because that was kind of my jam, and it was something they were really enjoying as well. So I ended up just like kind of making a little symbolic dice roller, like kind of for a free app. And we played that for kind of, quite a while. I'd say it's got like kind of maybe like 4 or 5 months, just of a very, very basic version, playing kind of horror movies. And it got to a point where we're realizing, oh yeah, no, we're, in like 1 to 3 sessions, we're playing through an entire story, characters having arcs, it's all like rounding off really, really nicely. And I think because of the way that we were kind of leaning into the cinema aspect of it, no one felt railroaded. They felt contained, is what I would say. And I think this is where we're kind of winding around because you say we tangented, but I think it's very important with a giant open world, which you often find kind of with like fantasy RPGs. And this is something I found. It can be really, really overwhelming on both sides of the table, I think, for GM and for players. You get paralysis of indecision for the players of where they want to go. And you also get the fear in the GM that they might potentially go to an area that you've not developed yet, or you've not read about, or just do something like completely unexpected, which then just kind of put you into that reactionary position, which is fine, but it can put you on the back foot a little bit more. Also, with horror in particular, that kind of trying to make horror work on what I would call open ground, where someone could like dash into a city or like travel somewhere else, becomes quite difficult. And it's kind of where a lot of my screenwriting expertise started to come in. Of basically, all good horror movies typically like kind of work off of a what I would call a lockbox scenario. What you're it ultimately means that your players are contained. It doesn't mean that they're railroaded, but you're ultimately creating of varying scales a container, that a scenario that they can't escape from unless they engage with the story, because that's how it kind of works. And that can be being isolated in the woods. It can be being stuck on a spaceship, being broken down on an alien planet. There's various elements and tropes. The whole cell phone's not working, absolute classic. Cell phones not existing, which is one that we found has been an absolute godsend by going temporally agnostic. Peasants can't call for help is something we've learned on the mobile phones, which makes it very, very fun. And just kind of giving you this lock-in, and it doesn't happen kind of straight away. Sometimes you build towards an environment like that, but when you hit it, that's when the horror always ramps up. And it's a screenwriting trick that I've kind of taken into generally how I do my adventure design. It tends to revolve around that, or it's definitely some of the questions that me and the design team are kind of asking ourselves, of being that, like, what if X runs into the woods, or they try and get a boat and sail across Camp Crystal Lake and get away. Like, what do we do? What do we put in there? What's the disincentive? They could escape, but like, what's the horror blockade that they're going to have to overcome? That's going to be quite.
They trip in the woods as they run through them.
Yeah,
they always trip when they run through the woods.
Yeah, trip in the woods. Like, for us with like slashers, like kind of based in kind of like, so we've got like a camp slasher that's on the way. That's going to be one of our first starter boxes. So like somebody running into the woods. The whole background of this, they're miles and miles and miles away. So somebody runs out into the woods, even if they get away, they're gonna basically be out of the game. Which is like, if that's what they want to do, they can do that. But this kind of like gets into kind of what I'd call like the unspoken kind of contract of like kind of gaming as well. of that you're kind of there to participate in the story, and you can take an action that is going to oust you from the story. But if somebody did that, I'd happily let their player get away. I'd just be like, we need to give you another character that can be involved now back at camp. But I might bring them back at the end, with a police officer who's got a shotgun, a la Friday the 13th. Like that can work. Or they run into the woods, and because of the survivalist background of the slasher, they have to evade a number of traps that of increasing difficulty and horror that might end up with them getting captured, maybe not killed. So that's the kind of element that we're kind of putting in there. There's a time element, there's a danger element, there's also a kind of the kind of main antagonist element as well. Slashers are great for that. I mean, we have a rule that actually an ability, I should say, for the slashers called off-screen teleporter, which is when, if they're not observable by players, you can move them by quite a distance. Just like kind of in any great slasher movie, it makes no sense that they can move that fast when they're off screen.
Does the slasher get played by another character, or is it the GM who plays or the directors? I think you call it the directors.
Yeah. So the director would be like how you're like running your goblins or your orcs or your enemies, your dragons in Dungeons and Dragons. It's very much the same. Slashers are an interesting one. It's why they're getting their own expansion, is because they are a solo antagonist, which is odd and is quite interesting mechanically to play.
How do you do that fairly? How do you have a character, because obviously he's there to hunt them, how do you do that in a fair manner so they feel like they're getting a chance?
So there's various design things that we've kind of like put in for that, of lots and lots of opportunities to hide. We also design things so like we signal when something is dangerous. So one of the things we constantly mention of being like, if in doubt that your players understand the level of the threat, kill an NPC in one go. Doesn't matter what the health is. Like have the horror movie moment, have somebody beheaded, have them shot through the eye of an arrow, like have it happen. Because there's nothing that gets players running and hiding and understanding that this is a threat that they maybe shouldn't face directly, like a very, very sudden death. And we've found that's worked really, really well as well. We tend to implement what I call like the smash and grab approach of slashers, which is a very movie type thing where they attack, they hunt for a certain period, then they disappear for a bit and give the players kind of downtime, as it were. They're kind of there for a certain amount of time, harassing the players, and then they'll disappear. Or sometimes they can be like triggering set events that then it kind of has an encounter with them that lasts a certain amount of time, and it's only like the finale or through accumulating doom, which is another of our mechanics, that the slasher then becomes a big permanent stalking threat. And there's various other things as well, of like slashers CR starts very, very high. As they engage with the story, they can discover a new mechanic that we're introducing called critical weaknesses. So rather than kind of typical like kind of damage weaknesses, that means it will do double damage or resistances. If they discover a critical weakness and they put it into effect, so for Jason Voorhees, for example, it's discovering that he was drowned in the lake, and that if he gets in an environment that's like water, he's really going to struggle, and it will put his CR down permanently by 1 if that's where you're fighting him. So as soon as you start engaging with the story and finding things out about the different slashers and how that interacts with the world, it then actually helps formulate your player's game plan, because then already they're thinking like, oh, that's what happened to him. If he gets wet and gets in water, then right, we need to kind of have a showdown with him, in the swimming pool, for example, and try and flood it. It gives them a tactic. It gives them something to kind of work with. And there's multiple of those for slashers. So, a slasher can be like CL4 and then start whittling down to 2 or 1 or 3, depending on what they engage with. But it means it makes the process of investigation and playing through the actual movie itself more rewarding, because it's their actions and their engagement with the story that allow them to tackle the threat at the end. And it's like, if they run off into the woods and run away and they don't, engage with, don't ask the question, like, why is this killer doing what they're doing? Then when they face that killer, they'll find it harder. So that's a big part of how we balance as well.
This is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, listen to it. It sounds fantastic. I mean, coming to what immediately comes to mind is this would be ideal for like a game based on Predator.
Oh yeah, you could do a Oh
So-
man, yeah, you could totally do Predator.
Or Dog Soldiers.
Oh, that even better. Yeah.
So in our community, one of the first things that somebody put into our Discord as a fan made adventure was their own version of Dog Soldiers, which made me so happy because it is one of my
I love that
favorite horror movies of all time. I love it so much, and it's very much the energy I want to capture of like of what it's like to play Shiver. That's a really good tentpole for me. It's Dog Soldiers.
Yeah, because it's a good sort of the one thing I love about Dog Soldiers is it's got that sort of British. It's the archetypal British black comedy, and not black comedy. Is it what we call it? It's not black comedy. It's dark. I don't know. It's not even comedy.
Like dark humor.
Yeah, it's got that dark humor to it, but it's like it does have humor, but it doesn't take the edge off how scary that film is and stuff.
Bounces at both sides.
Yeah, and it really does balance it out. You get a lot of films where, you know, the too much comedy just completely kills the darker edge, where that film has it balanced so well. It is funny, but it's terrifying at the same time, and it's such a good sort of kind of a balance.
Yeah, and also just like the writing in it, the characterization is just really is pitch perfect. I always go back to Dog Soldiers, like this is like how to write a really good horror film. Because just it's so quotable, right? You look at like the IMDb quotes page for Dog Soldiers, and it's just huge.
I hope I give you the fucking shits.
Same to you, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, and yeah, I love the film, and it very much feels like kind of like lightning in a bottle. You had the right director, you had the right script by the director, and also the casting as well was brilliant.
Yeah, good film.
Yeah.
But sorry. So I was going to say, talking about like horror films, what's your go-to horror film? What's your sort of kind of like your big one, or if you haven't got a single one, what's your top three?
I say, top one is always hard. I think the one that does usually end up on the top of the pile, but I'll give some others as well, is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Ooh,
it's one I revisit so much in terms of example of good writing, little smatterings of humor, but also practical gore effects. The creature work is stunning. The writing, I think sometimes the subtlety is sometimes kind of a bit overlooked, I think, of like in terms of like the increasing paranoia, the mistrusting of one another, the way things are phrased, the kind of layers that it kind of gives it, and the performances are fantastic. It kind of very much catapults it to kind of being like one of the top ones for me. In terms of like other ones that were like massively influential, I love that you mentioned Predator. Funnily enough, one of our Patreon adventure next month that's our next release is very Predator inspired.
Nice.
I would say, which involves a I shouldn't really spoil it. I say it might involve a jungle. It might involve something that's like a predator. And it might involve our first attempt at doing a hex crawl, which involves a roaming creature, which is like the predator. So in terms of to give you a sense of because we have our attempt to try and show you what it's like to be hunted, of having something moving around a map with you as well. But yes, as a sidebar, but yes, Predator and Alien are two that I put together, not because of Alien versus Predator, just to be clear, but because they were two that I was shown when I was quite young as a kid. For me and my brother, like growing up, that we fell in love with for completely different reasons. That, and I'd say Aliens kind of comes in there as well. So it's kind of Alien was kind of the real horror experience. And then Predator and Aliens were the
action,
the fascinating like action horror combo of and now like Predator, I think just like ages like a fine wine in terms of like when you realize what they're actually doing with it. Of that, it is a perfect lampoon of the 80s action cinema of the time. That it's just taking these absolutely insanely buff characters who look like they're unkillable and makes them incredibly mortal, like instantly in the face of something that they don't know. Because it's the fact that you're watching a film where it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, who in every movie up to that point, he's felt like he just couldn't be killed, couldn't be stopped. And then, you know, by the end, he's bleeding, nearly dead, covered in mud, and only just manages to survive. I think it really is pitch perfect for what it's trying to do, and I think it's fantastic.
Have you watched Prey?
Prey, I have. I very much enjoyed Prey.
Yeah,
yes,
I thought for its budget and for what it was. I think it's possibly one of the best Predator films. Like, I'm a massive fan of Predator 2 as well. I think it's a really, it's an underrated. It's underrated. Predators actually quite like that scene where they do the sort of kind of Japanese samurai type sort of standoff thing. I thought was awesome. That was such a good idea. But Prey I just thought was phenomenal. I just thought it was such a good idea. I would love them to do a Predator film back in sort of like feudal Japan, where there's a thing where feudal Japan sort of like, against the samurai or something. I think that would be awesome. I think that'd be so good.
I've seen that floated around, isn't it? Because there was a meme floating around of being like, hear me out, Hiroki Sanada versus the Predator as a disgraced Ronin, and the Predator's killed his lord. I was like, someone's playing around.
Or better yet, Seven Samurai meets the Predator.
They did a fan film, and it's sort of like knights versus the Predator and stuff. It's called Predator. Is it called Predator Knights? Actually,
Dark Ages.
Dark Ages. That's it. Yeah, Dark Ages. Yeah, and it was quite enjoyable. And I think that whole thing, there's no guns or anything like that, but something like that, I think, would be pretty epic. The one thing I liked about Prey was it was sort of like there weren't, you had sort of like matchlocks or flintlocks, sort of like you had sort of basic guns and stuff like that, but there was that more threat because it was mainly just sort of, stone axes and things like that. And I love the way the Predator wasn't fully evolved to what it is in the the more modern films and stuff like that. It still had that sort of, it was still advanced, but it wasn't as advanced, and I thought that was that's like really good. Horror films wise, I'm a massive fan of films that I don't, if it's a great horror film for me, I just won't watch it again because it just fucking scared the shit out of me and stuff. Event Horizon is gave me absolute nightmares. I thought it was absolutely amazing, but I can't watch that film anymore. I'm sure it's really naff now watching it back, but I remember watching it in '99 when it came out in the cinema and having pure nightmares for ages and stuff. That was just when Sam Neill holding his eyeballs and things and all that stuff. It was such a grim film. And I have to say, and it's probably, again, Paranormal Activity, and it wasn't the whole film, it was just one bit in particular which just kind of I was just like, nope. It's a bit where she gets dragged out of bed, literally just sort of kind of freaks out and gets trailed out of bed and dragged down the hall, and I was just like, oh my god, that is one of the freakiest things I've ever seen in my life. And I'm just like, okay, I don't want to think I want to watch that again.
I mean, as much as people bash and rag on Paranormal Activity, I mean, it was sequels Into the Moon and back. I think was part of it. But I mean, I was in my teens, I was at school when Paranormal Activity came out, and I remember going with a group of friends to go see that, and the phenomenon of it, of just how different and scary it was, I think, compared to kind of other things, just that kind of slow burn tension of it, and the kind of found footage element. I mean, I'm a big found footage nut as well, which is
so what did you think of Blair Witch then? So I went to see that in the cinema when it came out. What did you think of Blair Witch?
So I think I watched Blair Witch, I think post probably Paranormal Activity is when I watched Blair Witch. And I think Blair Witch is fascinating kind of in terms of cinema history, I would say now, but bar the last 10 minutes, it does drag, and the tension doesn't kind of run as long. It's one of the things I studied when I was at the university was the viral marketing campaign around the Blair Witch and the early kind of internet phenomena around it. Was I can imagine, like, for us when we went to go see Paranormal when we were kind of like younger, and there was the kind of the big furore around it, was probably even more intense around Blair Witch, because basically they created like one of the first like internet creepypastas or like kind of basically like internet folklore is what they did.
Made
people think it was real.
And
that is quite something. So I really appreciate it for that. But do I find it scary?
It hasn't aged well. But
I don't revisit it. To be frank.
Like,
I'd say that's where I place it.
I went to see it when it came out, and it shows how old I am. But I went to see it when it came out with my girlfriend at the time, and it had a very polarizing sort of view then. Like, I thought it was amazing, like, because it was something completely different. Like you said, it had this massive hype behind it. It was sort of like when the internet was just about taking off, and stuff like that. So it was just like, it was freaky as hell, you know. For most horror films, it was all about seeing something. You saw a bad thing, you saw an alien, you saw a predator, you saw like a nasty thing, you saw like an in thing, you saw a guy's hands getting chewed off from, you know, when he was doing the compressions, and it put Matt off fudge until he was sort of 16 years old because, you know, it made him feel sick. But with Blair Witch Project, you had something that was completely psychological, and it was just freaky. And I remember sort of kind of being in the cinema, and there's just one guy, he just got up and went, "This is fucking shite," and it's walked out. Well, I was just like, "What are you talking about, man? This is amazing." And then I had to drive home afterwards, and I live in like, I don't believe in ghosts and stuff like that, but at the time, younger and stuff, I lived in like what they call like a haunted sort of kind of area in a village in Ballycarry in Northern Ireland, and they had this sort of like building where they used to hang people, like, you know, that's sort of like it's a farm building now, but they used to hang people from it. My car broke down, or not broke, got a flat tire outside that building, and I just watched Blair Witch Project, and I have never changed a tire faster in my entire life. I was freaking out the whole way there, man. I was just like, no, what's going on? And that was grim. And the bit at the end where he's literally, you know, where it's just like, I thought, just the bit where it's gliding down the stairs, this sort of kind of the way that it's echoing in the background, the screaming, and it's like it's going distant from the camera, and then that guy's just standing in the corner, and I was just like, fuck me, man, that's freaky. And the fact, the way they did it, because I saw a documentary on how they filmed it, and they just didn't tell the actors what they were going to do, so they made them camp out in the woods, and they physically scared them. So when that woman's like dribbling with snot and stuff, she's petrified in general, like really petrified. And so I thought, you know, I've watched it again since, and it doesn't hold up as well, but at the time, for what it was, groundbreaking, and it was pretty freaky.
Yeah. Are there any games any types of games that you feel that the Shiver system is more mechanically appropriate, for want of a better term?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I would say, in terms of kind of your approach with horror, I tend to find kind of stuff that's a little bit pulpier, a little bit more B-movie. Okay. I would say it works quite well. So I think but it still is very broad. So like, I think like your slashers work well, your monster movies work well. Other writer on the team, Adam, who's done all the slasher stories, like we've split the book in half, so I've done the mechanics and have been editing him, and he's been doing the stories. One of the first things he wrote Shiver-wise that he ran for us as our regular game group, he based off of Tremors.
Wow. Okay.
But he said it in the Peak District, made it with giant rabbits, and called it Thumpers.
That's amazing,
and it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that's what I would say is the thing, is that you can do really scary grounded horror, but you can ramp the silly up real high. But I would say you tend to do well with like those big broad archetypal characters, like when you think of like the jock, the cheerleader, the stoner, like the nerdy kid, and putting them all into a group and seeing those big personalities work as a dynamic. It's those kind of movies they're I'd say those horror experiences that work really, really well at its core. But I would say that I can't really think of one where I could say it falls by the wayside, like or like the mechanics don't serve, which makes it quite difficult. I would say, I would say that obviously for all of your more kind of specific horror RPGs out there, so like for Cthulhu, for example, the level of specificity in the role and the skills that you're doing and how skilled you are at a granular level is going to feel way more particular. Whilst with Shiver, it explodes out backwards of basically being it kind of you're more skilled in like a broad area rather than like a specific thing. Although certain abilities and our backgrounds and the way you build characters kind of give you that as well.
It's loads. I suppose there's loads of options, especially in the B movie stuff. I was thinking of I
was thinking Fear Street actually. I've heard like the recent Fear Street trilogy on Netflix. That sounds like could work quite well in that format.
The what? Sorry, on Netflix.
The Fear Street trilogy.
Fear Street. Oh yes, the R.L. Stine ones. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it was one of the things that we were really kind of happy to see when it came out because we were like, oh, like this is a multi-generational across multiple time period story, and we were like, you could run this in Shiver, and I remember us talking about it and being like, oh yeah, this is perfect, and we can kind of use it as a bit of an example now of basically like doing slashes through time, which that made us very happy because that's basically a fundamental core of kind of where our slasher book stands. It's a multi-generational story, but it's kind of exploring the history of slashers, but also through the lens of screen and film technology and how that's distributed is all I will say, to not spoil anything. But that's kind of the take on our multi-generational like slasher tale.
I'm trying to think. Sorry, Pete.
What you said about the history of slashers reminds me of the Nailbiter comic series from Image.
Oh, I've only read the first volume of that actually.
It's basic.
The rest of it is good.
It's really, really good. I've read the entire series. That they were on Humble Bundle a few months ago, where you could get the entire Nailbiter collection.
Oh, missed it.
And it was basically like, why is this one town in America the birthplace of all these, like, the birthplace of serial killers? So yeah, like it kind of looks at the multi-generational aspect, and why does it keep coming back for it? I'm not going to spoil it because it is really, really good read. But yeah, what you said just really echoes into that, and yeah, if you get a chance, catch it.
There's loads of sort of like I think because there's loads of angles you can go for, especially in old school B movies and stuff. Like I remember a film that used to really scare the shit out of me when I was a kid. It was called Clown House. It's basically about like, I don't think it's got a good rating on IMDb, but as a kid, and obviously clowns, they're just freaky. But basically, a bunch of guys escape a mental asylum, kill a bunch of clowns, dress up as clowns, and go around and kill people. And all I can sort of kind of remember watching this, probably shouldn't have watched it as a kid, but sort of like he goes up to somebody before he kills him and he starts going, oh, he does this like clown face and he starts going, blowing his thumb like, you know, like a clown would do, and then he breaks his neck, and I was just like, oh, what the fuck. It's freaky as hell. And there's another one, again, I don't know why I watched these when I was kids and stuff, but there was one called Booby Trap, and it's basically like a post-apocalyptic sort of thing about a kid I think, or a guy who basically is trying to fight off like a gang using booby traps that he creates and stuff. Like the one I remember is basically he's got like this seat on a bike and this sort of knife just goes up through it and then gets this guy right in his nuts, and I was just like, oh, it's fucking horrible and stuff. As a kid, there's loads of options, man. You got stuff like that, so yeah, that's a really good idea. You know, if you've got something it can basically attach itself to things like that, then sky's the limit. The sky's the limit.
Yeah, so I think that was really the thing of like, I kept exploring like, oh yeah, I really want to be able to do Dog Soldiers, I really want to be able to do Predator, I want to be able to do Halloween, I want to be able to do this, and then it was kind of, I think as I was starting out early on, I was like, and looking at other horror RPGs kind of on the market, I was kind of, well, I don't really want to kind of like kind of tie myself down anywhere. I want to have that freedom to do Tremors one night, Halloween the next, and then shoot off in space and do Aliens. Like, I think that's the beauty of it. That's the freedom of it. Yeah, and also I think represents horror cinema in particular the best, like you just described, in terms of that the amount of zany, wild, and broad ideas that sit in all these fantastic little subgenres can be explored. And it's kind of what I've been wanting to try and do with Shiver, and then through the expansions that we're doing and stuff we're doing on a Patreon, is encourage people to like go and explore those subgenres, like go and find new movies, go and watch the strange movies that, like, you know, aired at like 1 a.m. that you kind of saw an hour of when you were a kid and you kind of half remember. Go and find those films. I mean, like, for me and my brother were talking about this of remembering the top shelf of the video rental store, really lurid, strange covers. And it's like, now as an adult, I'm going back and trying to remember what those are and watching those, and they are, I mean, like, I do a regular night called Beer and B Movies with my friend Ben, and it is a wealth of inspiration. But also, it kind of has this thing where it's like, these movies are flawed, they've got problems. But for me, I'm someone who's like made films and stuff like that. I love all the flaws and the effort and the real kind of like punky nature of horror movies, that they were made on a dime and people were like working together and throwing everything they've got at it, even though they barely had any money to kind of make these movies. And there's always gold in these films somewhere. And it's not, and sometimes you like land on something that's an absolute gold mine, like just a film that you've never heard of and is just fantastic. And you're just kind of like, why is no one talking about this? And it's because it came out in the wrong era. It was buried through censorship. There's so much stuff with horror that it's not fully disappeared, but it's very close. Like, it's kind of near being lost media to a certain degree. And that fascinates me. And I kind of want to encourage people to go and, you know, delve into the depths of Prime Video, where it seems a lot of this stuff seems to go to die. Have
you ever seen the film called Ghost? It was a stage show. It was a play even called Ghost Stories. What's Nyman?
Yes.
Andy
Nyman.
Nyman, yeah, Nyman.
And Andy Nyman, yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen it, or have you seen the play?
Yes, I've seen the film adaptation. I've not seen the play. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen the play, actually. That
for me is like, I went to see that when it came out. And I'm not, it's not like I don't hate horror, it's just like, you know, it's got to be a situational thing for me. I'm more of a sort of like going to watch sort of, I'm one of the superheroes sci-fi type things, but a good horror film I'll go and watch. So I went because it was Halloween, so me and my girlfriend at the time thought we'll go and watch it. Like, she didn't like it, but it blew my mind how deep that film was and all the interlocking bits. And because obviously he basically does Darren Brown's stage show and stuff like that, and it's all about sort of how your mind sort of affects things and stuff like that. And they sort of tied in a lot of the sort of kind of the reality of what horror is with sort of, you know, jump scares and freaky stuff going on, and had possibly one of the best sort of, you know, that bar that and maybe the Babadook, it had sort of like one of the best sort of like endings. Like my girlfriend at the time hated it because she's like, well, that just seems really fucking pointless and stuff. Why would you do that? And I was like, that's absolutely genius. I wrote an article for it on the website. Like, I was just gushing about it and how it all linked together and how that point links to this point. If you take this into this and you look back on it. And I thought, you know, as a film as well, because it's meant to be about sort of like the horror isn't the reality. The horror is what's in your mind and how you are sort of thinking about processing it and stuff, and how sort of like, you know, it is literally a trick of the mind. It is sort of like, you know, you got that whole Darren Brown thing. It's about the fragility of the human brain and how it can do these sort of things and create situations and stuff. But it was scary to watch and stuff. Like, it was freaky to watch. There's parts in it and it was just like, fucking hell, man, that film had so many levels to it. It was scary, but it was thought inducing. And again, like the Babadook, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the Babadook before.
Oh yeah.
The Babadook. Yeah, again, so Babadook's pretty freaky, but it's got a really sort of like the ending, and I'll not ruin it for anybody who's not seen it, but the ending's just a bit sort of like, what the fuck? But the thing is, you go when you read about it and you're like, so it has a meaning. And then once you get that meaning, you're like, it makes sense.
The all through the subtext.
Yeah, it all sort of kind of ties in.
Actually, one thing what you mentioned about the era when like films to speed. That was going back to video nasty area of like the 80s and early 90s, and yeah, there's loads of films from that time that just vanished because censorship, and moral panic. I mean, think that one of my favorites from that time is Split Second, starring Rutger Hauer.
Which one was that? What's Split Second?
That has been on my beer and B movie list for a while, and I've still not seen it. So this will now put it straight up to the top of my roster.
What was Split Second about again?
Split Second was basically Blade Runner meets Alien. But
it's like flooded London, isn't it?
London.
Yeah, rings a bell.
2012. Rutger Hauer plays this hardball cop, hunting down this serial killer that is ripping out the hearts of its victims, and it has probably one of the best ever armory scenes ever.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not gonna spoil it because years ago that was just brilliantly done. Also from that time, I recommend. I am that old. I remember it quite well. Is Project Shadow Chaser, which is basically Terminator meets Die Hard.
I'm gonna write that down. Shadow Chaser.
Project Shadow Chaser. Yeah, and you've also got there's loads, and also you've got the Chances films.
The Trancers films.
Yeah.
Trancers. I don't think I've
they're
heard
more
of that.
They're more science fiction time travel, but there's a distinct horror element because of the Trancers themselves. But yeah, it's like what you said about there's loads of films at that time from Video Nasty that just got canned.
I think you're landing on a really interesting point. Like you said that, like with Trancers, that you said there's more of a sci-fi element there, but there's still horror in there.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a point as well that I want to make with Shiver, because it's a kind of how I feel about horror cinema and trying to unweave some of this negative past that we kind of have with horror, of people seeing it as being trash, like morally bad, something that's going to inspire violence, all of this, like kind of that moral panic, the kind of from the Fat Right era, the Video Nasty era, still echoes down to this day. Like it still causes problems. A lot of people kind of see horror as the bottom of the bin when it comes to, I guess, like the hierarchy of like cinema, even though I think that's absolute nonsense. There's a real snobbery around it, I think, is a thing. And a lot of people will very staunchly say, I don't like horror. I'm not a fan of horror. And in my head, it's kind of like, okay, do you watch Stranger Things? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I really love Stranger Things. It's like, okay, that's a horror series.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, that's a horror series. And it's like, did you like Jurassic Park as a kid? It's like, oh, yeah, I love Jurassic Park. I love dinosaurs. It's like, that is a horror film. Like, in terms of it's structurally, it's monsters. I mean, it is. It's what we're exploring with our horror expansion, Shiver Blockbuster. What I call Spielbergian peril. It is low blood, low gore. There is death, but it usually happens off screen. The threat is high, but the blood and body count is relatively low. But it is still horror in terms of like down to how it's structured, the archetypal characters that emerge within it. It shares so much of its as much DNA as it does with Alien, as it does with kind of other movies. But people don't see it that way. They want to see it as a Spielberg film and not a horror film, because as soon as and marketing also pushes it that way, because if you describe Jurassic Park as a horror film, it instantly turns off certain people because of the snobbery element.
Well, you look at like the raptor scenes where the kind of that's just replace that with Alien, replace that with like the Xenomorphs, and it is essentially scene for scene a replication of Alien.
Yeah, and there's a load of stuff with the elongated shadows, the stuff like it's pulling from Nosferatu and like much older cinema as well. That kind of has its horror roots, and I think it's the interesting thing where it's a generational thing that has been passed down, of that like horror is amoral trash, that we're really wanting to try and shake, and we're kind of having it shaken up now with a lot of the A24 releases, where this idea of prestige horror has emerged, which personally I hate. I don't like that as an idea. Horror is horror. People are only just kind of waking up to the fact that actually horror is one of the most socially conscious genres there is. If you want to say something about the world, like horror, honestly, I think shakes people the most. I mean, look at Get Out. And the stir that caused as a movie. There's so many kind of movies that like kind of take the anxieties of the world and put it kind of on screen. Horror is the genre that's going to do that.
Yeah, Fear Street actually had the two main characters were LGBT.
Yeah.
Again, and they were the front and center, and I love that. Are you aware of do you know Quad in Derby?
Quad, yes.
Yeah. Have you been to their Paris Cinema Festival?
I'm aware of it. I missed it last year because I was away, so I'm intending to try and go this year, hopefully. Because I've managed to go to Mayhem in Nottingham, which is a big horror one. That's great. Anyone who's a horror fan in the Nottinghamshire area, I'd really recommend Mayhem. Really, really good. Run at the Broadway Cinema in Nottingham, Lace Market. But the Paris Cinema at the Quad is one I've been wanting to get to as well.
I didn't know about Mayhem. I'm going to check that one out, actually.
I'm trying to think. Have you ever seen Pet Sematary? One of the film Pet Sematary, not the book.
Oh yeah. No, I'm a big fan of like the King films.
Yeah.
And the books. Like I've been slowly kind of working my way through everything he's written over time. Out of one book out of every 5 I'll do a Stephen King where I can.
Pet Sematary and Pet Sematary 3 freaked me out. Again, I don't know why I watched all these when I was a kid and stuff, but yeah, they really sort of like scared the shit out of me. There was one which there's one called Cat's Eye, I think, which is like a 3
the anthology film.
Yeah. And I think it's so good. So you've basically got and like I can't remember what there was one one about a gargoyle which has an amazing sort of kind of twist at the end. The gargoyle one, you got one, I think it might have be Steve Buscemi in it, but I think I'm not sure, does it have Steve Buscemi in it? I'm gonna have to find it now and see if it's got Steve Buscemi in it. But it's, let's see, looks at the cast here. No, it doesn't. And to be honest, to be fair, but the guy, one of the main guys in it, sort of finds a scroll for a mummy, and the mummy goes around and fucking kills people and stuff. And that, a very sort of kind of, I remember that visage. And then there's the one where there's that little gnome thing that basically tries to steal the little girl's breath, and the cat it has to protect her and stuff.
Cat's fighting it.
Yeah, and it's good.
One thing I really liked about what you've been saying earlier was about how you have a age rating system in your game. I mean, I'm a dad of 3, and just like I like to run games for my children, so actually having an age rating system and a mechanic for the level of the type of content in there is really appreciated.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's the thing I've noticed is that when it comes to like the general like knowledge, I think, of tabletop role playing existing, like being something that you can kind of get into, there's role play clubs at schools now. It was something I was kind of very aware of that. A bit like how I was introduced to a lot of this kind of like cinema by my mum, like Jaws, Predator, Alien. Some of it's probably a little too young, but hey ho, I stand by it. She made the right decision. I think we wouldn't be here now if she hadn't shown me those films. But I would have loved to have had a role playing club like when I was at school, but that never was really a thing. But the thing that I was very aware of that, like providing those experiences for younger players, I think is really, really important. Because the broad scope and scale of like what is out there and the kind of stories that are out there. I mean, D&D is D&D. It's got market dominance, but I think the thing that we don't really talk about as much is most of it's a lot of angry fish shaking at Wizards of the Coast. But one of the things that it's actually doing is that it does keep quite a stranglehold on the genre of storytelling that people assume is the only thing that tabletop role playing can do. Is high fantasy, and I think that is sometimes a bit concerning. And I think for me, making kind of horror more accessible to younger kids, I think is really important. Because also I had this when I was like writing films kind of more frequently, and like figuring out, because we were trained to like how to place stuff in the BBFC rating system. So if I needed to write something for a 12A, I knew what I needed to go in, what needed to go out. So I take the same approach with me. Adam is also someone who trained on the same course as me, so he has the same training as well. So when we sit down, we decide what the age rating is, but then we both instantly know and have that dialogue and that knowledge that, okay, if it's 12A, this and this can't be in there, for example. Like, and if it's a 15, that opens a band. If it's 18 plus, it's pretty much like gloves are off, do what you want. Is kind of where it lands. So yeah, no, I think it's really important. But I think for kids, the thing I learn, and it's this is from my experience as well, kids like to be a little bit scared. I mean, you take Jurassic Park again as an example. That Velociraptor scene is seared into my brain from when I watched that when I was like 6. And it scared the crap out of me the first time I saw it. But it's a movie I would go back to again and again and again and again. And I think horror films are really important, and horror in general is really important for getting people to know and understand fear in a safe and accessible environment. Because and you know, it is a way kind of like exploring yourself and your limits and your own fears as well. And I think the kind of the moral panic of like, no, we like people shouldn't be kind of scared at all, I think is wrong. It's like, no, we can't avoid that, but cinema, games, literature like that explores horror allows us to do that in so many different ways, in a safe way, in an engaging way, in a socially conscious way, that I think shouldn't be ignored. And I think especially for younger players as well.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Pete, carry on.
No, like I was doing some research on the psychological benefits of role-playing games, and just it kind of expanded out into media as well at one point, but also what, especially in role-playing, the experiences we have in the game are registered autobiographically, even though we know ourselves that what the incident is fictional, we recall them as if they happened to us, even though, like I say, it was pure fantasy. So it kind of it acts as a source of experience and knowledge of learning, and to further understand your own responses in that situation and how you would react, and again becomes a learning platform.
I agree with you. Like, as a kid, there was, you know, I think there's two ways you go when you're a kid, especially if you're into geeky stuff. It is the high fantasy, like sci-fi sort of direction, which effectively is high fantasy just in space, or there's the horror side of things. And I remember very sort of vividly as a child growing up, and having like this thing we called Ghost Club, where because we lived in a haunted forest and there was ghost stories flying around everybody, and me and my brother and my friends were really into that sort of thing and stuff. But you know, when we came to it playing games, it was always high fantasy, and then we did play D&D, and we did board games. There was no real horror side of things to go into. And to be honest, the first time I ever played a horror RPG was one I was pushed into by my website when we played Call of Cthulhu, and I'm glad I played it, because, and that was only what, 7 years ago, and I'm really glad I played it, because that was an amazing game, and it was completely different to what I'd done before. But like you said, you grow up in high fantasy and you sort of kind of stick with it and stuff, and there's no real, at the time, I don't think, you know, for me growing, there wasn't really any other real options and stuff.
Yeah,
but now
there's been the Curse of Strahd and like Ravenloft setting in D&D, which it's introduced a Hammer horror-esque horror into the D&D setting, but I don't know how effective it is, really, to be honest. How have you found that, Charlie?
So my experience with Curse of Strahd, especially now, and I've like kind of read through Strahd. I've not played a game of Strahd, actually. It's been one that I've been kind of wanting to do because I'm quite curious about it. But my two takeaways from it have kind of been this, is that it does smack still slightly, I think, even with the kind of revamping of that, there is a cultural difference back in the TTRPG space, like in the 80s and stuff, like where this spawned from, where it was more not GM and players telling a story together, more GM versus players trying to murder them, and there is still an element of that there, not as much as like Tomb of Annihilation, but it's there, definitely. And for me, like the big thing that it relies upon, because obviously like you can start at lower levels, but then you build kind of into higher levels, it's still pretty deadly. And it's very, very random. And I think the way that it develops its fear is very interesting, but it's not one I necessarily agree with. The fear comes from the taboo nature of character death in D&D, and it being a bit more deadly, a bit more unpredictable than other kind of D&D modules, and more punishing, more punitive, kind of in that way. And it's this is my, but I do think like atmospherically, I love Hammer horror stuff as well. Like atmospherically, Strahd's a fantastic villain. Like he's just a great like archetypal vampire. I love my kind of vampire stuff. And like the setting and the exploration element of it, I think is really, really fascinating. But I think my takeaway from it is that core fear is the fear is people losing their characters.
Yeah.
That they put
it's,
X amount of time into.
Yeah.
I think rather than being actually scared of the horror of the story. It's more my feeling on it.
Because I think also like D&D as a system does not mechanize horror.
No.
Very well. For example, you don't have the sanity mechanic like you have in Call of Cthulhu, or the humanity mechanic you get in like Vampire. So there's no kind of mechanical representation of the psychological impact of what you're experiencing and the horror element. So yeah, it feels like.
Well, like we said, like D&D doesn't give you fear because the fear is you will die, and the fear is you'll sort of you could die very easily. Whereas in D&D, you can do a lot of stupid shit and probably get away with it and come out, and sort of mosey along. Whereas Call of Cthulhu and what would seem like your Shiver, the Shiver games,
dying in Call of Cthulhu is considered a good thing because usually you go insane first.
You know what? My character went insane. We got to the very end, and it was we did a whole it was a one shot. It was really good. Ended up in a house, a cottage, and we had to do a ritual, and it literally came down to the wire, and it was like we had to keep the ritual going, and my guy went mad and sort of stopped the ritual and went off babbling nonsense, so I was pretty much out of the game, and it was all down to the last guy who he got insanity points to the point so he was like psychopathic or something, but he sort of reasoned with the DM, said, look, right, fine, I am this character, but I'm all about my self-interest, therefore is it not my self-interest to carry on the ritual? So fine, I don't care about any of these people, but I care about myself, and therefore if I know that if I don't do this, I'm going to die, therefore I want to carry it on, and then fuck these guys, I don't care. And he said, yeah, you're right, okay, and we did it, and he carried on the ritual, and he won the game for us, but like the rest of us were like, he was just like, yeah, so you're insane and in a mental asylum, you're dead and this stuff, and it was just like, wow, that was cool, that was really good.
I think if we want to get kind of real technical kind of psychology on it in terms of like what elements of fear like different RPGs are kind of like playing on, D&D pretty much is playing entirely on the fear of extinction, like just death, like in terms of we're talking like primordial fears, like there's 5. Cthulhu I think is interesting because like extinction is becoming the better option, rather than you can be looking at pretty much the 4 others. So you've got mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death are the 4 others, all of which can happen in Cthulhu in different and extremely horrifying ways, and are much worse ways to go or lose yourself as a person. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, is what kind of core baselines of fear do different TTRPGs play on? Do they focus on one more than another? I mean, like Vampire in a way is ego death in certain ways, but it's ego death in terms of like the death of humanity is ego, which is fascinating. So in terms of what I would say, like kind of Cthulhu definitely lands in kind of like loss of autonomy. There's that possessionary element as well as the losing of your mind and losing control and it being given over to something else that can control you.
Though that loss of autonomy could apply to Vampire because it's all about kind of controlling the beast. And like if you feel like controlling the beast, then you lose control of your character as he goes into murderous rage, and that is considered a bad thing generally.
Yeah. Exactly, but I think this is the thing, is that horror focused RPGs are always going to engage more with the primordial elements of horror that go beyond death, because death is our baseline of what we're afraid of, but there's so much more to fear, as creepy as that maybe makes me sound, because I sound excited about it, but there is a lot more to it. There's a lot more elements that you can prod and you can poke with characters to play around with, that to kind of introduce like interesting character moments. I mean, in Shiver, one of the mechanical things we make you do with every character you make is you have to pick a fear. We don't tell you what the fear has to be. We generally say, like, try and make it sensible, like, where you can. Although, like, I had someone who said they were afraid of the color orange, and I made them regret it. You can believe the monster that teleported into the.
It was Trump, wasn't it?
Hunting them.
It was Trump.
Yeah. I wish I'd thought about that, because that would have been great. But had a large eyeball that was going to work like a searchlight. Originally, that was going to be purple. I just changed that color to orange, like, straight away. And it was like, as soon as that started shining and started hunting for them, they became afraid. The mechanical thing in Shiver is you're either stable, afraid, or terrified. When you're afraid, you lose 1 dice from every roll. When you're terrified, you lose 2. But you never lose your talent die. So you can lose like certain elements of skill. So the idea is that it represents, the moments in horror movies where you're trying to get the car started and you're fumbling the keys, for example. Like you can't, like, if it was a hearts check to convince someone to come along with you, you start to kind of stutter and stammer because you start to lose control, kind of when you're afraid. So that's how we mechanically represent fear. For us, so we don't do sanity, but we do how afraid are you. Is where we kind of position people, because when you're terrified, you become mechanically, it is much better for you to run away, hide, calm down, or get yourself in a safe position, or lock the monster somewhere so you can take a moment to breathe and then get more of your kind of function back by being stable. So that's just quickly on the Shiver thing. That's how we handle fear.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good mechanic. Yeah,
that was really good.
Yeah.
I mean, where does Shiver go from here? Like, as I understand, you've done the Kickstarter, it's been successful. You have, and it's now you're working on the next Kickstarter for it. Am I correct?
So currently, so in terms of kind of where Shiver is currently, so the core system has been out for the past couple of years. So we kickstarted that. Year after that, we kickstarted Shiver Gothic, which is our love letter to like Hammer Horror, Universal Monsters. Gives you rules for playing as the Universal Monsters. So if you want to do your League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Monster Squad, you a BPRD. I'm a massive Hellboy nut. Like, you can team up your monsters with your human characters from like the kind of core book, and you can do that. And the beauty of it is we give you a big setting that you can use for that. But like anything in Shiver, it's like a plug-in. So you could take the monsters and you could BPRD it, put it in the modern day, put it in the 60s, put it in the 70s. If you've got a fish man, they can exist whenever you want them to exist. Like, it can be medieval, it can be in space. That's the kind of fun of it. And then the year after that, we moved to GameFound, and we funded our double feature release, which is Shiver Slasher, for our horror diehards, and Shiver Blockbuster. So that's going to be 2 big hardcover like expansion books with new rules and a big focus on like stories, as well, like interlinking stories, as well as 2 starter boxes as well. So to try and kind of onboard people kind of more easily. So that's going to be a condensed kind of rule book, which, unlike other starter sets, we include premium character sheets with pre-made characters, but we also give you character creation up to level 5. Because character creation is so easy in Shiver, we want to show it off. We want you to engage with it, and have fun with it. We just kind of condense it a little bit. and kind of cut it in half really, and take out like multi-classing and that.
And when's that
and
out?
each one has a unique adventure depending on where we chosen slasher or blockbuster. So if you want a kid-friendly one, we've got dinosaurs for blockbuster. If you want slasher, we've got our classic. We've got Return to Camp Blood, which is a sequel to a slasher movie you've never seen, as Adam has put it to me.
Nice.
Which I have played and is extremely fun. It's very, very good. So yes, sorry, you had a question.
When's that being released? Sorry.
So that's going to be we're just finishing up kind of digital files now. So we'll be releasing like digital files to our backers probably over the next 3 to 4 months, and then early next year, like first quarter or early second quarter, physical rollout will start to backers, and from after we fulfill to backers, then it rolls out into stores. In the UK, and is like where we can kind of in all the other territories as well. We always try and prioritize getting stuff to backers first, and then do our store rollout.
Awesome. And that you can check that all out on parabelgames.co.uk.
Absolutely, yes. You can check that all out on parabelgames.co.uk. But in terms of our next actual release, so early October on Kickstarter, we're going to be launching our first solo RPG. Called Don't Play This Game, brackets please do. So in terms of that conversation we were having about found footage horror, this is a solo RPG of found footage horror, where if you ever had like a chain letter or a chain email where it says pass this on or you'll die, the idea of this is that an entity has found you, and it's going to play a game with your life where it makes terrible things happen and it forces you to record them. The whole thing with this is that like with solo RPGs, it has a journaling element, but it also tells you to put the book down, take a photo, draw something creepy, make a little artifact that you found in your story. So it becomes more of a game of scrapbooking horror, and a way that we've kind of been pitching it to people, because it asks you to go outside, if it's safe and you're kind of able to kind of Pokemon Go finding the Blair Witch, is how we have put it. So and the whole idea of this is, though, if your character dies, or they survive, your record or your cursed adventure you can pass it on to someone else. So someone has the rule book, you can pass it on to them and be like, here's my record, you are now cursed. And then they can read your record and then use that as a jumping off point. So what we want to explore is, through solo RPG play, how do we build a community and network of interlinked horror stories that creates that, like with the Blair Witch, that self-functioning and organically growing folklore.
It sounds a lot like the legacy-based board games.
All right, yeah.
Where you kind of like, as the game goes on and progresses, but it's based on like what the players have like done in previous sessions. And I mean, yeah, I've had a try of it, and actually it's a lot of fun. I mean, I love the design of it. The design really just nails that sort of grungy homebrew horror, brings the best way I can phrase it. And yeah, it's really nicely done. Like, so I've had a little play of it and really liked it.
Yes, well, it's in terms of that grungy kind of homemade horror, a lot of it is me making congratulations, you're cursed. It's because it is all grungy and homemade. We're doing a real focus on like practical handcrafted elements, like digitizing them and bringing them in, and that practical articles to give it that as much tactility as possible, because I think I've really enjoyed solo RPGs and exploring a lot of them, and there's nothing wrong with ones that I think are like solo journaling. Like, I think they're very cathartic and very relaxing, but for my design process, I really wanted to bring this tactile element like into the solo world of like, and basically I was just like, how can I scare myself shitless? It was my big design question with this one. How can I really spook myself out? And that's been the thread that's been taking us through Don't Play This Game.
Oh, sounds very good.
Yeah, and it really works quite well. Like I said, I really enjoyed playing this. I'm looking forward to how how it develops.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So with Don't Play This Game as well, I'll mention we have a site for it. The Quick Start that you've played, Peter, is available. You can sign up to our mailing list, and it'll ping you over a free copy to play. It basically gives you 10 chapters to play through in sequence. In the actual book, you'll be rolling dice, you'll be moving through it randomly, so you'll never have the same experience twice. It'd be pretty near statistically impossible for that to happen.
Okay.
So you'll be interacting with it in a different way. So it's not a linear chain when you're playing through the actual book. There's a randomization element to the experience to help you keep generating new stories every time you play. So yes, so that quick start's available now. Our follow page is also live on Kickstarter. So if that's something you're interested in, you can follow us and you'll be notified when the project goes live in early October. So yes, so that will be our next project that's funding.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Sounds really good. Okay, so before we go, we usually do it's sort of like a 20 questions sort of quiz type thing that we do, and it's basically you pick a franchise, it can a nerdy franchise. You can be horror for yourselves, obviously something that the other people who are playing may have a chance of guessing. So I might choose Star Wars, or I might choose that's some other film or something like that. You name the film and then you've got to guess a character, and you've got 60 seconds to do that. So I need you to think of a franchise, preferably one you think we might be able to sort of guess the character for, and then we'll give you 60 seconds, and we have to ask you questions to try and guess who the character is. For an example, I can start you off with one which will be Predator. So it's going to be a relatively easy one because there's not a lot of characters in Predator. But let me just do stopwatch. Right, so you've got 60 seconds to try and guess who the character is. You can ask me all the questions. Ask me questions. I'll say yes or no, or elaborate. And you've got 60 seconds. So 60 seconds, Predator, go.
In the first film?
Yes.
Does he take part in a muscular handshake?
He does not take part in a muscular handshake.
Okay.
Okay, does he carry a Gatling gun?
He does not carry a Gatling gun.
Does he have his spine ripped out?
Does he have his spine ripped out? I can confirm he dies, but I can't remember if he gets his spine ripped out. I'm going to say possibly.
Possibly. Okay.
Are they one of the special forces soldiers?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
There's not many of them. Come on.
I've never seen Predator.
You've not what? You've never seen Predator, Peter. Peter.
Is his name shouted repeatedly at any point? If it's this one.
No, it's not. Right. And that's 60. So
it's not Mac.
It's not Mac. Mac. It's not Mac. Okay, so your 60 seconds are up. You've got one more question, and then you've got to guess.
Okay.
I've only seen Predator 2 and 3. Every other Predator film, just not this one. Okay,
You've
I'm
not
going to
seen
guess.
the original. You've not seen the original Predator film, Peter.
Okay,
come on, man. That's
Is
your
it
homework.
Mac?
It's not Mac.
Is it Hawkins?
It is Hawkins. So that is a lucky. You just Googled things now, you little bitch.
I've never seen it.
I've ruined it. Could have gone is the one who tells the story. I was going down on my girlfriend, and it's like, geez, you got a big pussy. Geez, you got a big pussy. He says, why did you say that twice? I didn't. And then
I was gonna get, because my question was gonna be, is he played by Shane Black?
Shane Black, yeah. Man, I tell you what, that joke when I was a kid, right, when I first watched Predator, and I'm like, why is he talking about big cats? Because obviously I'm a kid and I'm not sort of. I was like, why? I don't understand the joke, and why is Billy so amused by this joke? But yeah, yes, it was Peter who's not seen Predator, and your bloody Google guess, you cheater. Right. Anyway, go and watch Predator, man. Jeez, what the hell? That's like a must-watch film. Right. Okay, Pete, what have you got for me?
Oh, okay. I'll look at the wall of shame.
Charlie, have you got one that you can think of by?
I could definitely do one for Alien.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, Alien. 60 seconds. Go. So, original film.
Yes.
Are they? All right. So, a meal. Are they meal?
Yes.
Are they androids?
Yes.
Is it Ash?
Is it Ash? 16 seconds! It's a new record! Yeah, you gotta... Yeah. No, this is one where Pete's going to do something really obscure.
I'm going to go with Alien again.
Okay.
But more likely Aliens.
Okay, right, okay.
But
So
Alien franchise is what I'm going to say.
Okay. Aliens, 60 seconds, go. Okay, so are they in the second film?
Yes.
Okay.
Are they Colonial Marine?
No.
Are they part of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation?
Not directly.
Ooh. Are they a child?
Yes.
Newt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another one of Pete's. He either does really, really obscure or pretty easy. So there you go. I win. There you go. Right. It's been a pleasure, Charlie. Really insightful stuff. Your game sounds really, really good. Like really interested in that. And everybody, please check it out. Parablegames.co.uk. What was the other one? Sorry, you had coming up. What was the other website?
So it's Don't Play This Game. So if you go on our social media through Shiver RPG, we're on Twitter or X, whatever it's called, at Games Parable. We're there too, and at Shiver RPG on Instagram. We're posting about that kind of now all the time, so you can find all the links to Don't Play This Game, the Kickstarter follow page. If you search Don't Play This Game on Kickstarter as well, you'll find it there too. All
right, awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. Really interesting stuff. Good luck. And by all means, when you've got something more, please do come back on. Or if you just want to come back, come back on at Halloween and we can talk more horror films and stuff like that. We usually have a Halloween special, we do. Yeah. But yeah, for me, being Matt Geary, with me has been the person who hasn't seen Predator and is going to watch it for the next episode. Or at least you're going to have watched Predator by Halloween, Pete. That's your homework.
I'm off to the chopper.
Yeah, Peter A. Allison.
Good night, everyone.
And our guest, Charlie Menzies.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Night, everybody. Bye.